What's up, everybody? MLS Power Rankings for Week 29. Andrew Wiebe, Matt Doyle, doing this live every single Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Twitter Spaces on my handle. You can see it on the YouTube right there. Or I'll just say it for those of you listening on Twitter, which I guess that's pointless because you're following on Twitter, at Andrew_Wiebe. We got a bunch of guests today as we go through the top 10. It's the same old as usual. Miguel Gallardo on Orlando City, Marcelo Balboa on the Colorado Rapids, Matthew DeGeorge on the Union, talking Timbers as well. Don't have a guest there, but we do have Drake Hills on Nashville, Nate Bukaty on Sporting Kansas City, Mikey Turner on the Seattle Sounders, and Elizabeth Pajota to finish us off at number 1 with the New England Revolution. But let's start, as we always do, Doyle, at 10 with NYCFC, a home draw against Nashville. That ain't bad. It ain't good, though, where they're at in the standings, and given it was at home, and they lost Anton Tinnerholm in this game. This was not ideal for NYCFC.
Yeah, I mean, it was at the home-friendly confines of Red Bull Arena.
It's home-ish, right? It's homey. Yeah. It's become homey for them.
The sixth borough. I will say it's not a great result. It was a great performance. Like they cut up Nashville, repeatedly got into the box, repeatedly got into the final third. If you're watching on YouTube, you could see the highlights now of them just not having that, not having the final touch, like banging the ball off the post, Maxi Morales pulling a shot wide. And then the last 20 minutes of this game, it was a shooting gallery, and Joe Willis came up huge. I still think NYCFC plays some spectacular soccer, but it's getting to the point where it's like it almost doesn't matter. If these guys don't start finishing, then they are a fringe top 10 team at best. And it won't matter how pretty it is in the buildup if the ball doesn't hit the back of the net.
Man, it's just, I am so much Team Tati that I just am puzzled, because when I look at this team, if you just on paper, and obviously when you say on paper, that's a caveat already, they have the pieces to turn performances like this into 3-0 wins, and I just am a little puzzled as to why that's not happening.
Yeah, I am too. Especially because, Jesus Medina was breaking out earlier this year. And I mean, Tata Castellanos, he leaves goals on the table, man. We've said this all year, but he's still got 13 goals and, 7 assists. Maxi Morales, we know what type of player he could be. It is weird. It is weird that this team has put in so many good performances, so many well-rounded performances, and have not been able to turn that into like a dominant, like 6 wins in 7 games type of stretch. Like, you feel like it's coming. People don't beat Nashville up the way NYCFC beat Nashville up in this game. It was like, again, if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing these highlights, how many times this team got into the 6-yard box and just couldn't finish. One other note from this game, Anton Tinnerholm came off midway through the first half. I mean, it looked like he popped his Achilles, which is a devastating injury. He is, one of the 3 best attacking fullbacks in the league. He's just phenomenal. And a lot of the stuff that NYCFC do in terms of creating overloads and pullbacks, it ends up running through him. Now, it does open the door for a super talented 19-year-old homegrown and Tavon Gray, who I thought looked very good. But looking very good in your 5th MLS game is not the same as being one of the 3 best fullbacks in the league. And so this was a tough weekend. It was a tough result. It was a tougher issue with the injury. And NYCFC fans are borderline panicking right now. And while I'm not there yet, I don't blame them for being there.
Right now they're in 6th, 40 points. DC have 40 points. Montreal have 40 points. Atlanta are the team below the line in 8th on 39 points. All of those teams, including Orlando, 2 points ahead of the 40-point squad, have played 28 games. So this is basically a 6-game sprint to the finish. And if you're looking at NYCFC's recent, let's call it an 8-game sprint for them, they have 6 points in their last 8 games.
Yeah.
Their trend from, late summer, July-ish, when they were really rolling along there, and that was really from like June through the summer, it's downward. And that's not the time of year you want downward. So when you're looking at this Eastern Conference, Doyle, and I really think it's going to come down probably to DC, NYCFC, Montreal, and Atlanta, and I don't put the Red Bulls in the category of having a chance of jumping teams and getting above the line. I'll probably pay for that. I'm not going to guarantee it, but I just don't see it happening. 3 out of those 4 teams are going to make it probably. Will
Yeah,
NYCFC be one of those teams?
I think they will, though it's worth noting the next game for NYCFC is away, quote unquote, to the Red Bulls on October 17th. And the Red Bulls have a game in hand. So if the Red Bulls win that game in hand and then beat NYCFC in 2 weeks from now, suddenly things are really, really bad. Really, really bad for the Pigeons. Again, I still think they're going to make it. I watch that game, man. They ripped Nashville apart. I just I believe that a team that plays like that will eventually figure out how to put the ball in the back of the net.
There's a little bit of advanced analytics. I'm not going to call it fool's gold, but just sort of like trickery with both NYCFC right now and in the Western Conference LAFC.
Yeah, very much so.
Teams that the numbers say should be much, much better than they are, and for whatever reason, they're just not playing up to it. 10 in these power rankings. Let's keep it rolling at number 9, DC United. Last second losers to Orlando City. Enjoy those highlights as you watch on YouTube. Man, that's a heartbreaking loss, I would think, for Hernan Losada and the boys, given the way that they've been playing. I don't think it was a bad performance at all, Doyle, but this time of year, good performances are one thing, and good results are what actually get you to the playoffs, and that's where DC are trying to get. No matter what happens, I think you've got to give Hernan and this entire squad, by the way, massive props for what they've been able to accomplish this year, both in sort of switching the DNA of what DC are from a sporting perspective on the field, but also adapting. It's not just a pandemic, but it's a new coach that very clearly from the jump, and we sort of had some giggles about it, and we're a little puzzled at first, has completely changed the culture and the way that this club is run and the expectations that the players have upon them. But they've adapted. They've begun to thrive. And they got a little bit unlucky. And the flip side is maybe, I don't know. Daryl DK is just a beast, man. He just posted up 2 guys at the near post in the 97th and put it over the top of Bill Hamid. So you can't be too upset about that. But not ideal for DC this week, but they got to be happy to be above the line.
Yeah, I mean, they have to be happy. They are happy to be above the line. If you look at if you look at DC United Twitter, they are borderline ecstatic. At the same time, this was not a great performance from them. The intention was there, the clarity in how they want to play was there, but they couldn't execute it. They couldn't impose themselves upon this Orlando City team. DC usually, and I'm going to use some second spectrum numbers. This is the tracking data system that we have. DC usually holds teams to about 3.2 passes per possession. Anytime they get on the ball, 3.2 passes. Orlando City, 5.1 passes per possession in this game. That tells you that the pressure wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite good enough from DC in this one. And my concern with DC going forward is that the stuff that has worked for them week to week in the regular season, and they've played with such great energy, now that everybody else, it's a lot like the Rapids. Now that everybody else is ramping up their energy and has basically a full season of games under their belt and understands their system, DC's style is going to be less sort of oppressive for the other team. It's going to be easier to play through. And it just so happens that this game against Orlando City, top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. Next game, they host Nashville, top 2 team in the Eastern Conference. Game after that, they host New England, the top team in the Eastern Conference. That is a pretty tough run of games. And
I also just want to throw it back to their recent slide, which was away against Nashville, 5-2 losers, away against the Revs, losers, home to Atlanta United, losers. That's in the last sort of skid, and those are all playoff, either elite or adjacent teams in the East.
And that's been the story for them all year, right? They just don't have that extra gear to turn a lot of really good performances into a long winning streak. They don't have a winning streak longer than 2 games this year, even though they've played really, really good soccer. So they're another team like NYCFC that's just clearly going to be in a scrap for the rest of the season, trying to get over the line. They play NYCFC near the end of the month at NYCFC, but then they will end with a kind of an easier schedule. Red Bulls at home, Columbus at home, and then at Toronto FC. So they have it here for the taking. This DC United team does. They just got to keep doing what they've been doing, play a little better than they did this past weekend, and the fans will continue to be happy on Twitter. It's nice to see at least one fan base that it happens to be happy on Twitter.
Well, don't let's
not going to get
let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. As far as DC United players that have sort of taken a big step forward this year or had a resurgent season, how would you rank them? I mean, you got Ola Kamara in there, you have Julian Gressel in there, you have Andy Nahar in there.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think who else you might put
Russell
into it.
Russell
Knaus would go in there.
Yeah. I mean, Donovan Pines has had a nice sort of linear progression.
I think you'd have to say Edison Flores, just given the fact that last year, because of injury, was close to nothing for him.
Yeah,
seems to at least be showing that he's on the path back.
Yeah, but the big one is Nahar, and like Gressel has obviously snapped back to his Atlanta United form, but a large part of that is how he's being used and how Nahar, as a dribbling maniac of a right center back, allows Gressel to be used. Like Gressel plays as a wing back, except his positioning is a little bit higher because Nahar is almost like a false right center back in that 3-4-2-1 that Hernan Losada plays. So because of the positioning and because of the threat that Nahar presents off the dribble, Gressel's getting a lot of chances to hit wide open crosses. That's making Ola Kamara real happy because Julian Gressel is maybe the best crosser of the ball in the league.
Tactically, if you're Hernan Losada, as soon as you got into that team and watched a few training sessions, you were probably like, okay, well, how do I manipulate space and positioning so that Julian is literally standing out here with that, that little 3-step run up he has where he kind of pushes the ball ahead of him, gets his head up, and then it's boom, 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 whip.
Yeah.
And then it's just danger. That's got to be one of the, the half seconds or seconds as a defender in this league where you're backpedaling, where you're just like, oh, God, please. Just let this not be in the right spot right now.
Yeah. Losada figured that out. And, I mean, he wouldn't have been able to this degree of effectiveness if it wasn't for Nahar having just one of the great bounce back seasons in MLS history, because he looked washed last year.
It just not even washed.
LAFC.
It just looked like his body was not going to allow him to continue to play professional soccer.
Yeah,
it just it didn't look like the load that would be required of him he was capable of, and that was really sad, to be honest with you. For me, I mean, I remember the early days of Andy Nahar, just DC marauding up and down the flank, and you're like, my God, this kid is incredible. And that was, now we're spoiled. We're like, oh, another homegrown making a big impact. But that wasn't like that back then. And then to see him go to a Champions League team and make this incredible career for himself and be an international with Honduras of great, I mean, it just, to see him back at this level in DC, it's one of the most special stories in MLS this year. All right, let's keep it rolling. Let's keep it within this game, though, this matchup, because we are going to number 8. Orlando City. You'll just see their goals again on YouTube if you would like. 2 set pieces. Miguel Gallardo. You hear him on the broadcasts every week. Miguel, what's up, man? Miguel, unmute yourself.
Hey, guys. How are you? Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you.
Yeah, it's awesome. And still a little bit on a high after that late goal by Daryl DK. The adrenaline was pumping high for a few days. And it was just it was a good time to be an Orlando City fan.
Tell me what this one meant. And when I ask you that question, I'm really just sort of envisioning Oscar Pareja giving his staff some of the warmest embraces I've ever seen on a soccer field. I mean, this must have meant so much. It had been 5 games, I think, since a win for Orlando City, and this is the time of year you just can't afford it.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a big moment because they went through some dark times, losing 4 games on the trot, and then when we were looking at the schedule, you were going against New England Revolution, the best team in the league. Then you were going to go to Nashville SC, a team that's very difficult to beat, still undefeated at home. And we thought this was going to be a time where it was going to either make you or break you. And mathematically, maybe they would have still been in a good position. But, there's a big thing when it comes to playing with pressure, especially towards the end of the season. that you felt as though if they were able to get good results versus New England, Nashville, and obviously DC United, then you were going to be in a much better shape. And I would argue that versus New England Revolution, they really played them a tough match, and they had the opportunity towards the end to tie the game, come away with a point if it wasn't for the heroics of Tyler Turner. Let's just focus on that side. And then Nashville SC, you guys know how good they are defensively. They're very stingy, and to get that late goal was just massive. And DC United was such a good team. I really enjoy the way they play, and I watched them. I really paid attention to them. The first time Orlando City played them earlier in the season, when Orlando City beat them 1-0 at Audi Field. But you could tell that there was something about this team. There were a lot of injuries. I think they might have been 16, 17 players on the roster that day. But you could tell that there was something special about this team. The way they press, they're so dynamic, they're so energetic. They got different variables. And Julian Gressel playing wide, one of the best crossers of the ball, like you guys say. Andy Nahar pushing forward. Although back then Andy Nahar was playing on the left side as a wingback, that didn't work too well for them. But they had that kid Paredes as well, who wasn't available for this match. So you knew this was going to be a tough match. But I think the way they played him throughout the 90 minutes, Doyle talked about keeping them to longer possession spells. And I think having Seba Mendes back on the team after missing 12 games was a big reason why. Sebas gives him, more fluidity in the middle of the field, allows longer spells of possession. He's a guy that's always scanning, always, looking over his shoulder, playing simple passes, making good decisions. And I think that was a big reason why. But obviously, having Daryl DK back, healthy, confident, he went through a tough time. He played for 13, 14 months consistently, not getting a real break, and coming out of college, that's difficult to do. But he looks like the real deal the last 3 games, obviously scoring 3 goals, important goals, and he's full of confidence. And as you're looking to finish the season, strong, to have your forward in the moment that Daryl DK is right now is super important.
Miguel, how close is this to sort of the final form of Orlando City? How close have we seen this team come to being what they could be? Because even this weekend against a very good team, they knocked the ball around a ton, but it's not like they were creating a ton of chances. So, what needs to happen for everyone to see that version of Orlando?
Yeah, no, you're right. That's a great question. And and coming back, thinking back in the beginning of the season, you're thinking, what is the ideal starting 11? And Orlando City hasn't had that all season long until this last game, where somebody without really paying attention to what happened throughout the season, that was probably the closest it got to the starting 11. Yet you still saw some lack of cohesiveness in certain areas. The relationship between Nani, Mauricio Pereira, and whoever the other winger is it Van der Water, is it Benji, is it Chris Mueller? I still think we haven't seen the best of it because we haven't seen it together as often. Um, and I agree with you. I think those relationships, though, in the final third, that even though you have great players individually, and Mauricio Pereira, Nani, when he's in a high, when he's in a good moment, and same thing with Van der Vaart and Benji, and of course Daryl. Those things they gotta get on the right page. And sometimes Orlando City does a great job at breaking presses and getting to the final third, but then you see a little bit of confusion or lack of clarity to play that final ball. Who's penetrating? Who's making that penetrating run? Who's playing that final ball? And hopefully before they get to the playoffs, hopefully they're able to get that a little bit clearer. But you're absolutely right. It's difficult to tell now what the best 11 for Orlando City is. I think there's still a couple of questions, especially in the wide areas attacking wise.
Not that much time to figure it out, but Oscar Pareja is trying to. +6 spots for Orlando, up to 8. Give me the quick answer here on this, Miguel, because we got a bunch of other guests coming. We had just assumed, I think a lot of us had, that Daryl was just gone this summer. What do you think Daryl's medium-term future looks like? Do you think he will get sold, or is Orlando City going to be his club for the next year, 2 years?
Yeah, that's hard to tell, but you guys know as well as I do that abilities that Daryl has just naturally are worth millions. Now, what they're gonna do with it, how is he going to continue to develop? I think it's still up in the air. And obviously, him getting back into the national team, and I don't think I'd be saying something crazy that I think Daryl DK will be the forward for this U.S. men's national team in the next couple of years.
Oh, man. We'll wait and see. Got to find out. Thank you so much, Miguel. We appreciate you, man. Check him out on Twitter. You can see it on YouTube right down there, and as well on those broadcasts in Orlando. Thanks, dude. All right. Well, let's go to number 7. Big game in Seattle this weekend. Marcelo Balboa is here to chat with us as we watch these highlights on YouTube. Marcelo, how's it going? I'm good. How's the ink feeling? Did I see that right?
You did, man. I was just plugging in to listen. All of a sudden, now you got me talking.
No, we texted last night. You knew I was pulling you on here, but I guess we're kind of having the same conversation we had last time we were here. This isn't dropped points by any means. When you lose in Seattle to the Sounders, and there's nothing to be ashamed of there, but it does sort of feel like there is a little bit of a lull for the Rapids right now. Is that what you're feeling?
One, let me go with the ink feels great. It's been 2 weeks and it feels nice and it's everything I wanted. But listen, you went 12 games without a loss. You didn't play great soccer at times, but you found a way to get a result. The other day, you were bound to have a hiccup. And if you're going to have a hiccup, Seattle's not a place really to have that hiccup. So listen, 1 loss in 13 games. This will reset this team and focus it again and get ready for the playoffs.
What's next for Robin Fraser? What is that refocusing? Like what has to be a little bit better to accomplish what they'd like to accomplish, which I would think is number 1, you host a playoff game. Number 2, you win a playoff game. And number 3, you just give yourself a chance to get hot and go on a roll.
Right now is I think just getting everybody back on because you're going to have to make some changes this weekend with Mark Anthony Kaye and Acosta out against Minnesota. Minnesota's missing quite a few players. Is William ready to play, or does Clint get another shot here? So I think there's a few little things that he's got to just look at, but it's not like it's a huge thing. You know what I mean? And again, listen. Yeah, we're talking about one game that they lost to Seattle. So I think this team knows now that, okay, we had that hiccup. Now it's time to refocus, get back on track. And the next step is going to Minnesota and getting a result.
1 win in the past 6 or 7, I believe it is now, though. Yeah. So a lot of that seems to be the attack drying up a little bit and the defense not being quite as sharp as it was. Is it that, or is it just a case of, at this point in the season, teams that they're facing are a little bit sharper? Teams, if you make a mistake, they're a little bit more likely to cut you up.
I think it's a little of everything. You know what I mean? When you win so many games, you have that confidence. You're going to walk into a game and you can beat anybody. That's where you get unfocused on a set piece. You let your guy go. You just think that things are happening naturally for you. But yes, I think we're getting Rubio back 100% is a bonus. I think Nomley, now we're at a point where I think Nomley is going to start playing a lot more minutes and getting that start. So yeah, I think it's now, you've had a lot of rotation throughout the team, and Robin's done a great job, and he still has, I think we have 6 more games in this month, but it's about almost now starting narrowing down who your best 11 are and getting them out on the field and getting them in that groove leading into the playoffs.
How much does Nomley change the team? I feel like we just haven't. He's the DP, right? He's like the one.
Yeah, listen, he's close. It's just a matter of getting him game fit and getting him on the field. But just watch the way he plays, how smooth he is on the ball, the way he.
Sorry, I muted everyone accidentally. I hit the wrong button on Twitter Spaces. I fat fingered that one so hard. I'm sorry.
So anyway, back to Nomley. I think that he's close, and I think he can make a big difference because he splits balls, he splits back lines, he finds that half space, and he's always looking to play forward. Again, I put him in that category as Reynoso.
So let me ask you this: with Reynoso, it's a very standard 4-2-3-1. He's got 2 bodyguards behind him, essentially, in those deep lying midfielders in Minnesota, wingers who could run. Is that what we're going to see from Colorado going forward? Because one of the things that Robin Fraser has done so wonderfully this year is sort of mix and match formations all year long. And it's almost never been kind of a standard 4-2-3-1. But is that what it's pointing towards?
I think we've seen a lot of the 5-back system and the guys getting into the attack with Keegan and with Steves. But I tell you what, you watch that second half, they went into a 4-3-3 and they didn't give up a goal. They played with 10 players against Seattle. They still controlled the majority of the game. If you watch the game, unless you saw the banner up there, you couldn't tell that Colorado was down a guy. So I think now Robin has that flexibility to be able to go into this 4-3-3, and you can put Nomley out on the left side as a 7 or an 11 coming inside, like almost we see Roldan kind of coming inside with Seattle and freeing him up a little bit more.
Seattle coming again, Marcelo, here in 3 games. When you think about the playoffs, it's going to be the elite teams that the Rapids have to beat. How do the Rapids beat elite teams?
One, taking advantage of the altitude. That's something that they've done well this year. Number 2, eliminate mistakes. I think if you go back and watch that game, some of the mistakes that were made, Keegan, all he has to really do is pass that ball out of bounds for a throw-in instead of forcing it upfield. You eliminate little tiny mistakes, fouling João Paulo before he gets running past 4 guys. So I think it's little tiny mistakes. And against teams like Seattle, they're going to punish you. And I think that's what happened. And not taking anything away from Seattle. Nothing at all, because they're a great team. But I think Colorado had a few individual mistakes that cost them that 3.
You're on that field. João Paulo's running downhill. You clear him out, right?
He has no ankles by the time I'm done. And if I miss him, I'm sure Lexi or somebody else would nail him. Now listen,
somebody with long hair is getting
him. Somebody with long hair would get him, or a beard. I just think that, again, I think little tiny mistakes is what's the difference right now of Colorado getting that 3 points or taking that point.
All right, the margins, trying to get those on the right side for the Rapids. 1 win, and I think 6 or 7. Either way, you got to get it turned around here. Minnesota at the weekend. TBD on whether the Minnesota will have Reynoso or not. His red card is to appeal. Marcelo, appreciate your time. As always, man, Colorado at 7. Thank you so much. All right, on number 6 we go. Matthew DeGeorge, join us of the Delco Times, covering Philadelphia Union back to front. Always. You there, Matthew? Watch out if you can't hear anybody anymore. It's because I fat-fingered the mute everyone button, which is far too large, I think. I got to check with Twitter Spaces about that. But this is a big win for the Union. I had kind of, I don't know, one that I doubted them. But after the Club America loss in the second leg, Jim and Alejandro, everybody sort of like basically was saying, if we play like this, we're about to take some people down. And they came back and did that. So what's changed for the Union in the last, 3 weeks or so?
I think a lot of it's just focus. It's focus and being more clear on your goals. It's tough to quantify, and certainly I've tried to, and I know you guys have tried to, try to quantify what that CONCACAF Champions League hangover is like. But when your attention is split between a couple different places, it's really difficult to then focus in on, a Saturday in DC or things like that. And I think now that that's out of the picture, it's just them trying to do what they try to do all the time, which is counterattacking soccer. And, when they're at home, trying to break down teams that are going to sit in against them. But they've really brought the intensity. I think the game against DC in late August was a game where they started their first choice lineup, and it was a really listless performance. And I think that was the real alarm bells for the Union. And that's why I think Curtin comes back after that Club America game and says, hey, if we play this way and we don't play like we did against DC when we got embarrassed, then we can beat a bunch of these teams. And that's what it's been. They're more aggressive in midfield and trying to create turnovers. They're still not quite as crisp in the final third as they need to be to take that next step to be really elite in the East, but they're getting better. They certainly have a ton of final third entries, and they've been defending really well. This is still one of the better defensive teams in the East. So I think a lot of it is just focus and really bringing it every game and playing the way that they can, and that's how you get 10 out of the 12 possible points in this last stretch.
Andre Blake being Andre Blake is also a good way to get 10 out of 12 points in this stretch. He was huge this past weekend over the final 25 minutes with the Union playing down a man. I want to go back to what you said, calling them a counterattacking team, because I feel like this is a subtle at times, but at times actually pretty unsubtle shift away from what the Union have been the last 2 years. The last couple of years, the Union were a counter-pressing team. They would push their line of confrontation really high. It wasn't, quite as high as the Red Bulls, but, in terms of just like normal pressing soccer, the Union were maybe the best example in the league. It's not quite the same this year. They sit a little bit lower. Their line of confrontation is a little bit deeper, and it leads to counterattacking goals like the one that we saw from Alejandro Bedoya this past weekend. Is that a shift that you have seen as well? And is it a shift that is very intentional on Jim Curtin's part?
I think some of it is reactionary in the sense that teams are now coming in and saying, okay, this team wants to press high. We're going to try and take that away from them. And that's part of the success of that counter pressing originally, was that it took some teams by surprise. But when Ernst Tanner's been in the league for now going on 3 years, it stops being a surprise. And now teams are going to say, okay, well, we're not going to give them that opportunity to press high. We're not going to spend a lot of time passing the ball through the back. We're going to try and break that initial line of confrontation, and then hopefully they'll jump out of that high press. And it's been a lot of, especially at home, there's a lot of teams that have been willing to sit deep and basically dare the Union to break them down. So I think this is a case of the Union having to zig after the rest of the league has zagged against them, and not let them do what they want to do, and now having to adapt to that next order thing. And they've been moderately successful with it. I think if their finishing was a little bit more clinical, and we certainly saw that against Club America, if their finishing was a little bit more clinical, then they would be fine with it. But they're still creating turnovers in midfield. They still have a really tenacious group of midfielders with Leon Flock and Jamiro Montero and Jose Martinez that are creating a ton of turnovers in the middle of the park. And they're getting out on the break. It's just a matter of, I think, converting more of those chances. That's been the bugaboo all year.
Yeah, that has been it. The finishing just hasn't been up to snuff. But Szabelka looks he's coming around, but last 3 wins at home. I just want to throw that out for folks. Next 3 games on the road. Away at FC Cincinnati, that's what they call a must-win game for any team that has any playoff aspirations. Then it's at Montreal, not an easy one. At Minnesota, and then you're hosting Nashville. So tough 4 games there. I want to take off the field before I let you go, Matthew, because there's some big news in the Union world, which is that Chris Albright is headed to FC Cincinnati. Interesting timing for that one, given the matchup coming up. Walk us through what you've seen on this one and what it means for the club.
Yeah, Chris has been a really important piece in this club for a very long time. He had, obviously, as we know, a very long MLS career. The last 2 years were with the Union, and pretty much since he hung up his boots, he's been in the Union front office. One of the things that's really impressive about Chris is that he has worked under, I think, 3 separate regimes here in Philadelphia, and he's been indispensable to all of them as they've brought in guys with foreign experience in Ernie Stewart and Ernst Tanner. Chris has kind of been the translator of all the arcane MLS devices of the salary cap and the various allocation monies. And he's done a good job with that. I think his primary role here in Philadelphia has been as kind of the closer on deals. A lot of the heavy lifting of talent identification and kind of, I guess, cross-checking of scouted prospects is done by Tanner. But when it comes time to sitting down with agents and kind of closing the deal, Albright has a big hand in that. So I think he leaves Philadelphia with a really pragmatic perspective about what it takes to get things done. And, he knows from his time with the Union that if they're going to spend money, they can't miss. And he goes to Cincinnati, which has money to spend, but has seemed to exclusively miss in its first 3 years of existence. So I think he's a good fit there. It'll be interesting to see what he does with the academy there, because that's a little bit more nascent than what the Union have, and it doesn't really thread directly. But he's a guy that's put in the work, and he deserves a promotion and a chance to put his own stamp on an organization. He's come through the ranks, and he's proven that he can do it.
Pat Noonan for Cincinnati head coach. What's that? What do those 5 words mean to you?
I don't think it's going to happen just on the basis of the way Cincinnati has overreached in some of the past hirings. He would be the smart choice, which is what makes me think that maybe it doesn't happen. But again, that would be if Albright were to take Noonan there, that would be a smart, pragmatic choice. And maybe that's a determinant of whether or not the pragmatism that Albright brings is going to be trusted in Cincinnati. We'll see.
I better trust it, man. Everything else they've been trusted hadn't been working out for them very well. Thank you so much, Matthew DeGeorge, Delco Sports at Sports Doctor MD on Twitter, talking Union with us. We appreciate your time, man. Of course. Let's keep it rolling. On to number 5 we go. The Portland Timbers. Doyle, they're doing late summer, early fall Portland Timbers things. It feels like that is now, by my count, 7 wins in 8.
Yeah.
Now, look, we had some folks hit us up and say, why wasn't there more Timbers talk on Extra Time this week in a 27-team league when you beat Inter Miami at home 1-0?
That's why.
That's why.
That's why. You won a game you should have won. The Timbers have become, since that 6-2 loss to, or I guess since the 3-1 loss at Austin, which was, I think, a week after that 6-2 loss to Seattle, the Timbers have become the team that we thought they would be. We all had them pegged as a top 3 team in the Western Conference ahead of the season, and then they certainly are playing at that level right now. I think they're very likely to catch and pass Colorado over the next month and end up in that 3rd slot in the West. They have so much attacking talent.
Oh yeah,
and it works with Sebastian Blanco back. Felipe Mora has been fantastic, no matter what David Goss says. And Nijgoda now, he's not going to continue to shoot 64% from the field. But if he's your backup center forward, you're in really good shape. The big thing, though, is that the defense has gotten better. And part of that is, I think Gio Savarese has been smarter about how he's used Diego Chara. Chara's not covering as much ground. He's being much more of a shield than a go everywhere ball winner, which is not to say he's not, he's still having those Diego Chara moments where he's, 30 yards away from where you think he should be. And then he comes out with the ball and starts a counterattack. Like, he can still do that. But his primary job now is to protect that central defense. That's one. And two is, over the first 20 games of the season, this was the worst team in the league defending set pieces. This is the absolute worst team in the league. I don't think they've given up a set piece goal since then. And at the same time, they've been absolutely dominant on attacking set pieces. We saw it this weekend. The Nijgoda goal came off a corner kick. So, it feels like they just flipped a switch in mid-late August. And I mean, it's not something. This is not a team you want to see in the playoffs, no matter who you are in the Western Conference.
Oh, absolutely not. A good chance they're going to have a home game, maybe 2, depending on how it all shakes out and who wins in this single elimination. Chris Reifer just brought him in with us to give your take on the current form of the Timbers and where this all is headed, man. Chris, you there? You're muted.
You'd think at this point in the pandemic that I'd figure out the mute thing.
Well, I muted the entire thing a little bit earlier. So I know that whatever you were saying while you were muted was just absolute gold, just pure gold. Give us your quick Timbers take.
The worst thing that I was going to say in this entire discussion, which is that I agree with Matt.
Perfect.
But I do agree with him. A couple other things that I've noticed that I think have made the Timbers a lot better defensively. They've become a lot more pragmatic in the way that they're using their fullbacks. There's a lot more balance.
Yeah.
Whereas early in the season, it seemed as soon as they gained possession, they were just bombing on both Bravo and Van Rankin very, very early, which meant that when there were turnovers early in possession phases, they were just super exposed. They've gotten a lot better about making sure that if one is going, another is sitting. They've moved that fullback that is sitting a little bit more central, so you almost get the fullback D mid kind of look. once in a while from them, but you're seeing that a lot more than in the past, and I think that's just given them a bit more balance and a bit more cover. And I think there's been a similar dynamic as Matt just talked about with their defensive midfielders. They have sat in Diego Chara a little bit more, but mostly they've also just been a lot more cognizant about making sure they're maintaining that balance so that they're not quite as easy. It's not quite as easy for opponents to play in between the lines and to get into that space in front of the center backs where they were just getting carved up early in the season. So I think that's been a huge deal. One other guy that I think we've neglected to mention in this spot the last few weeks, Dairon Asprilla is having a huge season, guys.
We have never neglected Dairon in any way. Chris, I am personally, I'm more offended by that than Daniel Shallowy hate that we've been getting.
Look, I'm going to go and studs up on Matt right now.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Talking yesterday on Extra Time about how Andy Nahar is the lock for comeback player of the year. Dairon Asprilla played 46 minutes last season, guys. He missed basically the entire season with an injury, and has come back this year at a level, frankly, that we haven't seen him anywhere near at any point in his MLS career. It's been extraordinary. He's been, frankly, one of the Timbers' most consistent players over the course of the season, which is not something that I would have expected to say about Asprilla. So I think I certainly would want him and his name to be thrown into the hopper for, an award the merits of which I'll let others debate.
You know that if it comes to award season, we're setting the tone, baby. We got the narratives on lock. So Dairon Asprilla, he's in consideration. We got to put him on the list. Chris Reifer, we appreciate you, man. Always bringing some good insight on what's going on down up there in Portland. Thanks, dude. Yep. All right, let's keep it rolling. Nashville, Drake, can you master the mute button? We shall find out. I know you've been there for a while, man.
Yeah, that's the easy part. The harder part is to get you to explain as to why you have completely disowned Ted Lasso.
I haven't disowned Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso and I have more in common than most people do. And Sudeikis is a Kansas person. He's, I've actually watched KU basketball games at bars with him. We've basically gotten drunk together, but just on different sides of a room. I just don't want to get Apple Plus, and I value my sleep. Plus, we've been watching Squid Game, so that's getting the number one for me. Tell me what you're feeling about Nashville right now, though. 0-0 in New York. How's it going?
The fact that you look at the past three matches, and given that they have been polarizing results, which is odd because they're all draws. But you look at the way Nashville played in all three of them. You look at the first one against Chicago. Aside from maybe the first 15 to 20 minutes, it was basically setting up shop for a point on the road on a terrible surface at Soldier Field. And then you go and, so that was more of like a predictable result. But then you come home and you play against Orlando side, which obviously had a lot of omissions, had a lot of interesting, whether it be injuries or guys not fully fit yet. You had Nani coming off the bench, but you did have Daryl Dike, who did have, force some problems on the field, but you were up 2-0, and that should have been a win for Nashville, and you give up two late goals in the final quarter of the match. One of them being an own goal off a set piece, which has become some sort of a problem, oddly, for Nashville this season. Eight of those, and really 6 of those, to be honest, have been quite decisive in terms of the result, and giving up late goals to concede a point and share points. And then, of course, going to New York, where honestly, if you're Nashville, I think you're feeling pretty good because of what Matt said earlier. Just the fact that NYCFC completely dominated. I would probably say, aside from maybe 12 to 15 minutes of the game, when Dan Lovitz had an opportunity where I think it was right before halftime, kind of a one-timer, just missed it. And then, towards the end of the game, you had Joe Willis having to come up with 3 key saves to keep out Medina and Morales. I don't think it was Medina. I think it was Tati Castellanos. That was a showing where the signs are clear about Nashville still trying to claw its way into the international break, which is what Gary had mentioned after the Orlando game about if they can just get through Orlando and New York, which they did with a point apiece, that they'll get a chance to reset. But it's a different feeling than beginning of September when Nashville were really rolling. So I think it's going to be interesting when you take a look at the the next few games, and obviously Philadelphia and DC behind them. If you take a look at the strength of schedule, I would argue Nashville have the toughest, including DC on the road. So I'll be interested to see what type of tone setter it is come on the 16th.
I'm going to make a point here. This game against NYCFC was the fifth road game in their last 6. It was their 5th game in 16 days, which is a pretty insane workload. The next game against DC United, that'll make 6 road games in 7. Nashville looks like they're hanging on for dear life right now a little bit, but they are, in fact, hanging on for dear life. And there's a good reason why. It's because they have had the toughest schedule in the league over the past month, essentially, because there's been so much travel. And they're answering the questions that we had to ask after the first half of the season when they had, I think it was like 13 of their first 17 games were at home, which was, how will this team be able to hold up on the back half of the schedule? And it hasn't always been pretty, but I do think it says quite a bit about this team that they're able to go out and hold on and collect points, even while having to rotate, even on short rest, and even having a hell month in terms of the amount of travel that they just put in.
What's going to help, I think, couple of guys that really need to add some minutes to their log. One of them was Eric Miller on Sunday. I think arguably one of the better performances. I think Walker Zimmerman held up Tati to the best of his ability in that one-on-one battle, but I didn't quite see as much from guys like Dan Lovitz. Sapong was he didn't really have a chance to even get a lot of service because the way NYCFC was pressuring pretty much the entire game, it was like both he and Mukhtar had to basically drop in midfield, multiple times just to even get a part of the game. So he wasn't necessarily as much of a force as he has been recently. But, to Matt's point, if you take a look at how much of a tight turnaround that will be at home to Columbus on the 20th, and then you have to go to Philadelphia, which I think has been very decent in their own right. And then if you look at their schedule, they got, Montreal, they've got Toronto, and they got Minnesota. And then, of course, both them, Nashville, Philly, and I think Orlando, they all have a game against Cincinnati coming up. So,
man, poor Cincinnati.
There's points. There's points. Somebody's going to get 3 points somewhere. But with Nashville, it's not going to be easy, and it's going to take a lot of depth, especially in the midfield and the back line.
All right, Drake. We go longer, man, but we got to keep it rolling to get this thing done. I just want to say in my personal power rankings, candy corn is the FC Cincinnati of Halloween candy.
Oof.
Yeah, I think Ted Lasso would probably have something to say about that. And I'm pretty sure there's been a mention in there in season 2.
All right. I wouldn't. I may never know. Follow him on Twitter, Live Life Drake. Appreciate your time, man. On to number 3 we go. Nate Bucati, jump on in here.
I think I got the mute button thing figured out here.
No, everybody's got it figured out now. We're all learning together. That's the important thing. Kansas City 4-2 winners against the Houston Dynamo. There are a lot of great Daniel Shawi stats floating around in my DMs right now. I want you to basically be his campaign manager right now, Nate, and you're trying to convince voters out there to take their vote if wherever they're thinking they're going to put it. Maybe it's Carlos Heel, maybe it's elsewhere, maybe it is Daniel Shawi, and put it into the the Sporting KC man's into his coffers. What is his MVP case in your mind?
He still is young, by the way. And before we get started on this, I just want you to know, Andrew, that you don't need Ted Lasso to know that candy corn's a garbage candy.
Yes.
But it's not as bad as those little pumpkin-shaped ones that are made out of the same material. Whatever those ones are that look like little pumpkins.
Yeah, same material, different name, equal result. Make your case, man. What's your case for Daniel?
So Daniel Shawi, look, if we're talking about MVP, most valuable player, I think you just ask yourself, where would the Sporting Kansas City team be without Daniel Shawi this year? You've probably seen the stats. He's half of his goals have been either game-tying or game-winning goals for this team that's fighting for first place in the Western Conference. He's got 4 game-winning assists on top of that. And when you watch him play,
Nate, we know those are garbage stats. Like, we know those are game state stats. Those goals could come in the 20th minute.
So to quote Bruce Arena, are you watching the games or are you just looking at the stats? Because if you watch, who said that? Wasn't that? I feel like I hear that on your intro every show.
That's us.
Oh,
Point to that.
I thought you were quoting Bruce Arena when you said that.
You're trying to beat me with my own stick right now.
That's what I'm gonna do then. Are you watching the game? And I know you're watching the games, Andrew. And a lot of these goals, I mean, the goals that Daniel Shalhoub have scored this year have been big goals. They've been in big moments. A lot of them have been in situations where Sporting Kansas City were under a lot of pressure to find something when an opponent was bunkered in at Children's Mercy Park, which is a harder time to score a goal, right, than when you just have runouts and things like that. And so I think from that standpoint, when you also take into consideration how much they have missed from Alan Pulido this year, whether that's been with national team duty or injury problems again this year, they have not been able to rely on him, and that's the guy they're paying the big money to. And so when you put all those things together and the minutes he's played, I think you try to picture where this Sporting Kansas City would be without the contributions of Daniel Shalhoub this year, and I don't think they'd be close to the top of the Western Conference.
I'm going to throw some stats out there, and Chad Reynolds has been in my DMs. We've been talking about this for a hot second here. Sporting KC has scored 2 goals all season without Daniel Shalhoub on the field. That's a crazy stat to me. And I don't believe they've won a game without Daniel Shalhoub this season. You said most valuable player. You're taking it very literally. And I know your day job, man. You like the minutia is important here. And this is how these sports talk radio debates happen. Do you actually think that an MVP award is quite literally the most valuable player? Or is it the best player having the best season?
See, to me, then change the language to most outstanding player.
Oh, come on. It doesn't have the ring. This is branding and marketing, Nate. You know nobody's going to change this thing.
I also know how people vote on it. It usually goes to the best player on the best team. That's the way it goes. And I know that puts Carlos Gil at the top of the list for everybody. But you're asking me to state the case for Daniel Shalhoub, so fair. I'm going to get literal here and say most valuable player. And so, that's the way you have to look at it. Of course, that's the only way to look at it, Andrew.
What do you make of the rest of this season for Sporting? What are they trying to iron out? What is Peter trying to figure out to basically to accomplish what really matters? I know they're yelling about MVPs and about respect and all that, but come on, Peter doesn't care about that. He wants to win MLS Cup. How does he get there? How does this team get there?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 things that they have to accomplish over the final 6 games this year. And the first is obviously positioning. You want to make sure you hold on to one of those top 2 spots, and if you can get the top spot so that if there is a rematch against Seattle, you hope to have it at home. Although I would point out that the road team has won both of those games so far this year. And the other thing, and maybe this is more important than even whether or not you get the 1 or 2 seed, is getting the team rounded into good form and fitness going into the postseason. As much as Sporting KC have been able to crank out results without Alan Pulido on the field in the regular season, we all know that he was brought here because of the pressure that it takes to try to win in the postseason. When you're playing against other teams that have unbelievable quality on the field, sometimes the difference in advancing in the playoffs and going home is that type of quality that Alan Pulido brings to the table. So I think getting him fit and ready to play for the postseason is priority number 1. Continuing to get Jose Mauri, who has been playing at the 6. He started 5 games in a row. Mid-season acquisitions, as you know, are oftentimes tough for Sporting Kansas City because it's such a system-based organization that it takes guys a while to really, get acclimated. And he's been getting up to speed pretty quickly. 5 starts in a row. I think 6 more appearances possibly for him going into the postseason will be really big for their midfield as well. So I think for me, it's getting the team fit so that they have their full complement of players, number 1, and number 2 is getting the best seed possible for a good run in the playoffs.
So if the team is fit and they do have, and Peter Vermes does have the full complement of players to choose from, who starts next to Andrew Fontas and who starts at the 6? Because most of the season, it's been Ilie Sanchez in central defense, and it's worked. But I don't think that's going to be their best look in the playoffs.
It's a great question, Matt, and I am going to be fascinated to see the way it plays out. Look, if you look at it just straight up, what are you looking for out of a center back? Nicholas Isimat-Marin ticks all the boxes. He's got the speed, he's got the length, he's good in the air. He's everything, and he's good with the ball at his feet. The problem is he hasn't been able to stay healthy for any decent run of games all season long, and I just wonder how much they feel like they can trust him to be on the field through the course of a postseason. I mean, he hasn't been able to go more than 2 games without his hamstrings acting up on him so far this year. And the one thing they do have with Elie, and I note all of your points there, they do have chemistry on the back line for the first time in Kansas City in a long time. There's actually been consistency with the back four, and Elie and Fontas communicate incredibly well together. So do you sacrifice those things for the hope that Isimat-Marin can be healthy and contribute all the way through the playoffs, or do you keep the chemistry going the way that you do? My gut tells me they might go with the chemistry and consistency. Some of it might also depend on how Mauri continues to develop at the 6. Remy Voltaire has also done a really good job playing at the 6 this year as well. They need somebody that can cover some ground in that position. So that's my guess, Matt, but I don't I think it's anybody's guess really to see how it's all going to play out. And some of it might just really depend on how healthy everybody is going into the playoffs.
Can I ask you one last question? Felipe Hernandez. Every time I watched him, I was impressed. What's going on with Felipe? Why is he not with the club?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, and I'm not lying to you guys. I'm not blowing any smoke. They have been Peter Vermees has said very clearly that he's not talking about it, and nobody in the organization is talking about it. Whatever it is, I believe it's going to be the type of thing that if we ever find out what it is, it's going to be because Felipe Hernandez decides to tell us all. And from a human standpoint, it's personal reasons. That's what they've listed off. You guys all know that that could be any list of things, but those then are personal to Felipe. So it's going to be his choice when we all find that out. And you're right, though. He was playing really well and coming into his own.
I really hope everything's okay with him and we see him soon. Either way, thank you so much, Nate, for joining us. The debate rages on. Shall we v. Heel? And whoever else wants to jump in that mix. Feel free to drop in my mentions, folks out there, if you have a candidate. On to number 2 we go. Appreciate you, Nate. All right, it is the Seattle Sounders who got 1 first place vote. That was from Matt Doyle. Mikey Turner's here with us, I believe. Are you there, Mikey?
Mickey.
Oh, Mickey, my bad.
Hey, can you guys hear me? I think I figured out the mute button as well.
Right. God, man, everybody on mute. It's like Boomer Central here, and I'm feeling that pretty hard. How'd you feel about this weekend's game? A nice little 3-0 against a top team in the West. Sounders roll on. Everything as it always has been, apparently.
Yeah, I likened it to yesterday's Facebook outage. What a time that was to be alive and to have a little break and just kind of exhale and relax and think about simpler times, which is kind of what the Sounders did after beating up on Colorado. I think what the main thing that they wanted to get off their back was the home form, which was decidedly average or had been decidedly average all year. That was pretty much the last remaining talking point that they were dealing with. They had that disastrous 1 point in 3-game homestand, which basically took them out of the Supporters Shield race. I know they're kind of technically still in it because they do have a couple of games in hand, but let's all be honest, New England's winning that. So that aside, their next goal is to keep their name at the top of the Western Conference standings list, and beating Kansas City and Colorado in the same week is a good way to do that. And so it was definitely mission accomplished on that point with 9 points in three games.
What is going right for them in attack that kind of wasn't throughout the summer? Because it's not just 9 points in 3 games. I think it's 8 goals in 3 games. And there hadn't been a lot of offensive explosions from this team outside of that Portland game 2 months ago now. That had been kind of missing. And it just seems like maybe more of a commitment to get more players forward and into the box. And I'm not sure it goes anything beyond that, right?
Yeah, I think you can narrow it down to one player. To be fair, obviously the whole team is playing better, but Christian Roldan has been the main catalyst, I think, for their scoring, providing that scoring punch. He scored in 4 games in a row, and he's been doing it kind of from a little bit deeper lying position. Even though he's playing a little bit advanced, he kind of provides those late runs into the box. That's how he scored his goal this weekend against Colorado. Similar goals he scored as well in his 4-game goal streak. And so I think having that other scorer has been what they've been missing, or what they were missing over the summer. And Rui Diaz has obviously carried a lot of the scoring load, but as you pointed out, they were, Portland aside, it was a lot of 1-goal games over the last month and a half or so. And, over this past week, they've been getting it, with the 8 goals in 3 games, getting it from a bunch of different players, and Christian Roldan being the, kind of leader of that. With Raul Rui Diaz out and Nicolas Ladero never having really been fit this year. So that's been, I think, where they've really, come into their own in attack, is having those additional options, providing the additional scoring punch.
How did you experience the João Paulo goal, by the way? I just need to know. We just watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, I was in the press box covering the game. And, yeah, it was you're, as you, I'm sure, are aware, you're not really allowed to, cheer or applaud. But the Uzadas were there, and the hands on head, and that is kind of how I experienced it as well. Just, again, that goal was right before the half. The Sounders had, obviously done well to get the 2-0 lead, but just to see his kind of marauding run through the Colorado defense. I heard Marcelo's comments about, someone should have fouled him about 4 different times. I think something that gets a little underlooked in his game is, he's quicker than, some people think. He's got the great center of gravity, and he's obviously fantastic on the ball. So it's difficult to bring him down. And they tried their best, and he still was able to put it through. And, it's tough to see where the Sounders would be. Speaking of MVP candidates, it's tough to see where the Sounders would be without having João Paulo there, who's played almost every game this year.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned Nico Ladero not being healthy really all year, and obviously Jordan Morris has been out all season as well. We know the company line on those 2 guys. I mean, Jordan Morris, we see the film of him in training. Apparently he's very close. Ladero, it's been a little bit more opaque. I know that Brian Schmetzer has said they kind of expect to have them both ready to go for the playoffs. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Yeah. I'm kind of like you, am a little bit less optimistic about Ladero's ultimate long-term prospects for really contributing this year, for what's left of it. Just because, again, he's never been healthy. He came back. He didn't quite look like himself. One Golazo aside. And then he went and had the other surgery and hasn't been back in training as of yet. Morris, I am very, Schmetzer says he's almost ready to go. And I've been to some training sessions. He looks like he's almost ready to go. And I would expect him to be back here in training here in the next week or so. And he looks good. He looks really, really good. So of the 2, I think it's pretty clear that Morris is more likely to be a contributor. Now, whether he's starting again, that's another it's another question that we could talk about at a different time. Schmetzer seems to think he may be able to do that towards the end of the year. But at least if you've got Morris off the bench as an option for 30 minutes for the rest of the year, then you've got something that you're really going to be scaring opposing defenses with. And then, whatever they can get from Ladero, I think, is just kind of icing on the cake for this year. But Morris, I'm pretty optimistic about what he could potentially bring to the Sounders in these last 7 games plus the playoffs.
Imagine getting Nico Ladero back would be icing on the cake for a team that is currently at the top of the Western Conference, averaging 2 points per game, hasn't had a best 11 player all year in Jordan Morris. Steph Fry's back playing well. Nico Ladero's probably not coming back. I mean, it's just an incredible season for the Sounders. Mickey Turner, thank you so much, man. Turner ESQ on Twitter. Sounder at heart if you want to follow him. Also at The Athletic. Appreciate you, man. Hope that coffee was delicious this morning.
It was, and it will be. It won't be the first one.
Perfect.
Have a good rest of the
Drain the pot. All right. Last but not least, certainly didn't play this weekend. Not moving in these. New England Revolution. Elizabeth Pajota is here to join us. Elizabeth, did you hear the case for Daniel Shalvey for MVP? Were you swayed in any way by that? I mean, you can leave your Carlos Heel credentials at the door, but did you feel anything during that segment? Or are you still just tried and true?
Well, I have to be honest. I'm still tried and true, but I was swayed by the Ted Lasso argument because I can't understand how you haven't watched that show. It's great. I highly recommend. But I know where Nate's coming from, and I understand we both have our bias being from different clubs. But I truly believe that Carlos Heel has proved his case for MLS MVP all season long. And we were talking about him from the very early stages, mid-year, when you were looking to make this case. And here we are heading into the final couple games of the season for all these teams, and we're still talking about Carlos Heel as the front runner. If nothing else besides his stats, which I know we'll dive into a little bit more, his consistency to still be at the top of this conversation at this point in the season shows that he is a strong top contender.
What do you make of the people who argue that Daniel Shalvey should be MVP because when he doesn't play, Sporting Kansas City are demonstrably worse? But when Carlos Heel didn't play, the Revs were still really good.
Well, I think it's a great sign that the Revs are a good team without Carlos Heel, but they're the number one team in the league with Carlos Heel and their lineup. And I think the fact is with Carlos Heel, he's not only a playmaker, a goal scorer, and a talented, skillful playmaker. He also elevates everybody around him when he's on that field. I think he breeds confidence. He also helps everybody have a little bit more skill in their game. And I think the fact that he's able to also make so many people better on the pitch, in addition to being the candidate that he is himself, says so much. And you take a look at the Revs, obviously they're having a historical season, but he has 16 assists. He has 3 goals. When you take a look at the numbers, that's 19 combined goals and assists of their 57 goals. A third of the Revs' goals wouldn't have happened without Carlos Heel necessarily. That's not to say they couldn't have won other ways. They have a lot of depth and they've continued to showcase it, but he's also been a standout for that team. So although they're a good team without him and they've showcased it because he did miss a month of the season with his rehabbing, he makes them a better team and has consistently done that the entire year.
Doyle, where do you stand on this? We talked about it before we started recording.
Yeah, I mean, I still have Heel number one. I think Elizabeth has made a pretty compelling case here, and just in terms of like to take a very good team and elevate it to potentially an all-time great team is the toughest thing. That is the toughest jump to make in this sport, and the Revs become what looks very much like an all-time great team when Heel is on the field. Now, as you said, without him, still a very good team, still a really well put together roster. Bruce Arena certainly knows what he's doing, both as a coach and a GM. But Heel gives that extra spice. And they are about to set a record. They are about to set a single season points record. They have 5 games left, 3 of them at home. I will be surprised if they don't set that record. And when you're doing stuff like that, you kind of look at the number 10 who's pulling the strings for the team at the top of the table. And I don't think it's as open and necessarily a completely open and shut case. But unless something drastic happens in the next 3 weeks, my vote is pretty much already written in the book.
I agree with you, and I want to add one more thing to add to his quality and consistency, and then I'll rest my case because I think I've put out some numbers and I've talked about it, but I think also the timing of when he's able to make key plays, which we especially saw when the Revs clinched their playoff berth at Chicago with that late stoppage time game winner, when he can create those special moments and they're in really key times in the game, I think that is also the sign of a standout player, that he can consistently do that. He has 8 game-winning assists. He has 2 game-winning goals. And I think that case in Chicago when he scored that late game winner in the 91st minute, coming off of the bench at the half, that just for me, that was the nail in the coffin with the MVP case for him.
And all of that, despite the midseason injury that we never got any sort of clarity on what it was. Or
yeah, I heard that. I was waiting. You were like, he was gone for a month. Pause. And I was like, oh, we might know. No, we don't know. But look, what I would say about Carlos Heel, and this is where my case comes down to with him, is that I think Daniel Shalvey, if you're talking most valuable player, He's right there with him. Sporting Kansas City would certainly not be anywhere near where they are right now without Daniel Shalhoub. They had that many, beginning of the season, Johnny Russell was out for a while. Alan Pulido's been in and out. He's been the consistent threat that allows the other players around him, I think, to have the space and time to succeed. But in that value, the value is second in the Western Conference, which is commendable. It's a very good season for Sporting Kansas City. It's nearing 2 points per game. That's incredible value. That is not the same value as being the best player by far, the trendsetter, a leader, a historic chance creator, and an amplifier for arguably the best team in the history of the league. And I say arguably because, if we really got down into it and dug around, we might say it would be Toronto FC in 17, or maybe LAFC's regular season, or maybe one of those early DC teams. We've done this debate on Extra Time over and over. But to me, that difference in value and the 13 points or whatever it is right now in difference is pretty significant. We're talking about a player that elevates a team from good to historic, and a player that elevates Kansas City from a playoff team to a top 2 team in the West. Daniel Shalhoub has had an incredible season. His bounce back is it's commendable. The amount of mental fortitude he needed to get through what was the downer that was last year, and I think even the year before for him too.
Yep.
To be this is it's incredible. And he should get all the praise in the world. Nobody's underlooking him. He's an MVP candidate. He just doesn't. The difference is history, and the difference is what Carlos Gil has helped to make this Revs team. In my opinion, I'm not a voter that says it has to be all about numbers, though I do say if you're a striker, you got to have 10 open play goals to be an MVP consideration. So DC fans, I'm going to cover you on that one. Elizabeth, when you think about the rest of this year for the Revs, how does Bruce talk about Shield versus Cup and the goals therein?
Bruce Arena, he takes everything game by game. And when you ask him about it, he says, listen, we're accomplishing one goal at a time. So I'm really excited to talk to him over this break a little bit more, because he said, okay, first we want to clinch the playoffs. Then we want to clinch first in the East, home field advantage, and they've done both of those. And now you look at their next goals, and that is the Supporter Shield, that is entering the playoffs. But I know their mentality consistently has been approaching every single game, game by game, and not looking at it as, okay, we're looking towards MLS Cup and striving just for that. I know they approach it game by game, and that's been something that they've preached all year, and truthfully has really worked for them. I mean, look how far they've come at this point. And I also do see Andrew Farrell in here. So hi, Farrell. I see you're listening to us chatting right now about you guys and the historic season you're having. But this locker room as well just has something really special. I've been with the team now for 4 seasons, and I know in the grand 26 years of MLS, that's nothing comparatively, but you can just tell within this locker room that there is something special. And it's the first time that I've really ever seen it with this group. Andrew's waving.
It's a special season for the Revs. I think that's going to be it for us. Elizabeth, thank you so much for waiting till number 1. It's a privilege to do so, right? So New England finish off our top 10. You can get the full power rankings over at MLSsoccer.com and the MLS app. Huge thanks to all our guests for joining us, as always, on the Twitter Spaces Power Ranking Show here on, on my handle, Andrew_Wiebe. Big thanks to Doyle as well. We will see you next week. I think the content is going to be a little bit different. It's a list of 22, perhaps, that we'll be talking about, but we'll put that officially out on Twitter and MLSsoccer.com. So enjoy the international break, everybody. A couple games this weekend. We're out of here. You can watch the full thing on YouTube if you're listening on Twitter Spaces. We'll see you next week.